Welcome to the a16z podcast. Today we're having another of our hallway-style conversations. These episodes are based on videos that are also available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/a16z videos. What's the path to success in the world of healthcare startups? Bioteam General Partners Jorge Conde and Vijay Pandey discuss how founders need to adjust their plans for bringing a new drug, process, etc. to market, and how go-to-market models and players involved may differ depending on the product, be it a molecule, process, or platform.
Hey, we got Vijay Pandey and Jorge Conde here, general partners at Andreessen Horowitz on the BioFund. So we got a lightning round today. So we're seeing all these forces of biology coming to computer science and computer science coming into biology. What's the lay of the land of that?
Well, this is as we all know, healthcare is a very complicated landscape. So let's just take it at a very high level, and then we can sort of dive in and go through the various players here. So if you're developing anything in the healthcare space, and let's just focus on human healthcare for a second to put a scope on this. Generally speaking, if you're going to develop a technology or a tool, you're going to develop something that's going to enable a drug or a therapy, or you're going to enable something that's going to enable the diagnostic to help detect disease. I mean, at a very high level, it's tools, therapies, and diagnostics. So let's assume that you're playing in that space. Generally speaking,
and you're thinking quite generally, the therapy could be many different types of therapies. I guess we'll see.
That's right. No, it could be. It could be a chemical. It could be a protein. It could be a cell. It could be a gene. It could be an app. Right. So it could be many, many different things. But generally, for the most part, if you're going to do anything that's going into humans or going to affect how disease is treated and managed, you're going to have to go through a fairly straightforward process in terms of chronology. But it's very complex underneath. Yeah. So you got to discover something that's relevant for human health, and that's sort of the R&D piece. If you're developing a therapy or a diagnostic, then you got to convince the people that matter, in this case, the regulatory agencies, to allow you to put this or use this in humans. Right. Then you got to figure out how to get it paid for. Then you got to figure out how to educate the healthcare system that this is valuable for patients, and then you got to figure out how to get patients to actually use it. Right. So it's not easy. And, the joke we have, this is not B2B, this is not B2C. It's much more complicated than that. And so, when you sort of dig into that, well, who are the various players there? So some of them are pretty straightforward. You have the regulatory agencies. So if you want to develop something on the therapeutic side, you're going to have to do human clinical trials. Right. If you want to develop a diagnostic, it's a slightly different path, right? If you wanted to make a diagnostic that is quite literally, a little box to test something, you got to go to the FDA.
Yeah, or clear, presumably.
Yeah, so now that's different. Okay. So if you wanted to develop something that could be tested in the lab, fortunately, the FDA has made it such that you could do something called the laboratory-derived test in a CLIA lab. And CLIA just means that you've passed sort of the basic processes that ensure that your lab runs a good process and that data is reproducible, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're going to do that, that's a less risky proposal. Right. You set up your own lab, and you can run tests. And as long as your processes are robust, the regulatory agency.
And we've seen diagnostic startups take this LDD CLIA approach, and that seems to be very natural to begin.
I think it's a natural sort of initial approach. It's lower risk and lets you get to the market much more quickly. On the therapeutic side, I think it's much harder, right? Because you do have to go through the traditional phase 1, 2, 3 clinical trials, and before that, you have to prove that it works in tests, in both in cells and then in animals. It's a very long process. But then the other path is that you can develop a tool or technology that you sell into the R&D industry itself, which is a really interesting go-to-market path if you have a very powerful technology, because it allows you to do a lot of things. Number one is you can figure out how to slice and dice this technology to sell to multiple players in a non-exclusive way. Right. Number two, the R&D industry in the U.S. alone is like a $75 billion a year annual industry. So, I mean, there is a lot of spend that goes into this space. And so that's another path you can take. So if I'm an entrepreneur in bio, one of the first things I would say is, do I want to make my own drugs or diagnostics, or do I want to empower the industry to make better drugs and diagnostics? Those are two very different go-to-markets.
Yeah, although I would think, and I think we've seen, it's hard to break into that, right? I mean, because you've got to have a tool that really changes the game so much that they will give you some fraction of that $75 billion.
I think that's exactly right. And this is where this concept of engineering is important, because it allows you to essentially convince player A to give you value, and without you essentially locking out the ability to engage player B and C and D, because if something is widely applicable and transformative, usually you can essentially sell it again and again.
Is there an example of like a tools company that became like a huge thing?
Sure. I mean, there are many examples. I think one of the classic examples is a company called Adimab that essentially came up with a better way to design monoclonal antibodies. And so What they were able to show is by partnering with virtually every company that is trying to develop monoclonal antibodies as a drug, as a therapy, they could take a small piece up front. Once it proves that it works, they get a big piece of the economics on the back end. And they've shown this again and again and again. And they're still a private company, and last I heard, it valued well north of $1 billion.
Right.
So they are a private biotech unicorn that has become that, doing just that.
Yeah, and I guess, to some degree, Illumina is an example as well, to the extent that it's driving research spend in addition to other areas in genomics.
Oh, I think Illumina is a wonderful example, right? Because they basically took what was an impossible concept of being able to sequence, full genomes at scale, cheaply and reliably, quickly, and made it not only possible, but made themselves sort of necessary to do this. You can't do genomics essentially without Illumina.
So, I think we're running out of time. I mean, so, how would you sort of think of this whole space together? How do you conceptualize it?
So the way I conceptualize it is it all comes down to, your go-to-market should be dependent on your technology, right? So if you have a technology that's very broadly applicable in, for example, diagnosing disease, the LDT path makes a lot of sense because you can start to churn out tests as you sort of develop them. If you've got a platform that allows you to develop drugs in a way that was not possible, maybe going and becoming your own drug development company might be the way to go. If you have a platform that's so broadly applicable at sort of elucidating disease biology, then doing it the partnership route might be the way to go, because you'll never develop sort of the deep domain expertise in every single disease in parallel.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine it, especially for a lot of tech-heavy product style founders, that just understanding the go-to-market issues from the very beginning, I think would be very important in how they define and shape the company and shape the product.
I think that's exactly right. So the way I would think about this as an entrepreneur is, do I understand what I need to prove, how I'm going to get it approved, and who's going to pay for it? And that will help define your go-to-market.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I think we're out of time.
Thank you.